Good day, viewers. It's great to see you today, and I am confident that you will be beside yourself after hearing today's guest, the fabulous and iconic Sally Helgesen. Among other things, Sally is the author of How Women Rise, which I believe is one of the best books on the market today about women, leadership, and how to carve out a career the right way. Sally has helped thousands of high achievers to reach greater heights and enjoy more satisfying careers. In her book, she identifies the 12 most common habits that undermine women in their quest to become more successful. As an author, speaker, and consultant, Sally's mission has always been to help women recognize, articulate, and act on their greatest strengths. And boy, do we need help sometimes. Her previous books include The Female Vision, Women's Real Power at Work, and the best-selling The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership. This book has been hailed as the classic work on women's leadership styles. It has been continuously in print since 1990 and has been translated into 12 languages. In addition to delivering leadership programs and keynotes in corporations, universities, nonprofits, and associations around the world, Sally has consulted with the United Nations to build more inclusive country offices in Africa and Asia, and she has led seminars at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and Smith College. She is a contributing editor for Strategy Plus Business magazine and a member of the New York and International Women's Forums. I could literally go on, but you didn't tune in to hear me talk about Sally. You want to hear from her directly. Me too. Get ready for a masterclass with Sally Helgesen. Sally, welcome, welcome, welcome. I don't know what I did to have you on the show today, but I am so glad you said yes. Thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, it's a real pleasure, Charlene. I'm very glad it worked out.
Yes, me too. This is just so fantastic. Now, Sally, tell our viewers about you. And, you've been at this, and by this, I mean focusing on women before it was popular. How did you get started? Why the focus on women? What's your story?
In the 1980s, I was working in corporate communications, and I worked at some really good companies. But what I saw is they had absolutely no clue what their women could be contributing at all as leaders or in terms of any kind of strategic thinking. So I thought, and it really bothered me, both for myself, but for the other women whose talent just seemed to be almost going to waste. So I thought that a way to address that might be to write a book about how successful women led, what their strengths were, what their methods were, how they did things differently and distinctly. So I started some research, and that book became The Female Advantage, Women's Ways of Leadership, published in 1990. Mm-hmm. And I'm very proud that it was the first book that focused on what women had to contribute rather than how they needed to change and adjust and fit in and do things just like the men, and that would make them successful. So because it was the first book, companies started calling me, come in, talk to our women, meet with our women. Can you, put together a program? And I thought, well, this is going to be more interesting than writing, speeches for corporate executives. Right. So I took the risk to leave that career and to see what I could put together in terms of women's leadership. And you are very right. It was not a particularly popular subject at the time. And but I knew that it was important. So I persisted and have kept with it now since I started that research. That became The Female Advantage for about 36 years.
Wow, that is so fantastic and so well ahead of your time. I remember starting my career in the 80s and looking around and saying, why aren't there more women in positions of leadership? And what's wrong with us, right? Because it seemed like we needed to outmen the men in order to be successful. And that's really hard to do if you're not a man.
It's really hard to do successfully. Yeah, you're always going to get beat at that game.
Right, exactly. So I'm just so thrilled to hear about the work that you've done, and now after having had a 33-year career in corporate communications, by the way, I when I read your book, I just so felt like, oh my gosh, she's been with me my whole career, and I could count the areas of strength, I could count the weaknesses, if you will, or just how I could have handled things differently. And I know, Sally, this is a big question, but what would you say over your time in doing this? What are the top 2 or 3 things, and it can be more, that you've consistently learned about women and women rising or not rising?
Well, first of all, as noted, women have extraordinary strengths. So it is really important for women to be clear about what their strengths are. And we all need to reflect on that. We need to come up with a very quick and clear way of articulating what we have to offer. Really, really important. Secondly, solidarity among women is key. And that's been a great thing that I've watched really develop. Back in the 90s when I was doing programs for companies, the senior women, far and few between as they were, didn't want to be associated with a women's leadership program. They'd say, no, I want to show that I'm a leader, not a woman. Well, first of all, good luck with that. But they didn't want to be associated because they felt that it would diminish them. So there wasn't that much solidarity. And that has been one of the biggest changes I've watched over this 35-year period, has been the growth of that and how women become invested in one another's careers. And then the third thing that I've seen is that women really need allies, and they need allies very broadly, and they need allies among men. So those, I think, are the really important things we need to think about, are what are our strengths and what are our internal barriers also? How do we demonstrate solidarity with other women and act together? And how do we enlist men as allies?
Absolutely. And just talking about, recognizing our strengths, how do you do that in a work environment where you are consistently either told or made to feel like your strengths that come because you inherently, because you are a woman, but you're made to feel that those strengths are actually what in HR speak, developmental areas?
Yes, exactly. And, when I started off, for example, one of the things I saw in the women I was studying is that they had great skills at building strong relationships, really strong relationships, at motivating people, at engaging people. These are all the buzzwords now, of course, engagement. But whenever I would talk about them, then people would say, well, those are soft skills. They're not leadership skills. So if you're getting that kind of message, the important thing is to always keep on your desktop a little list of things you've done that have been successful, and identify what strength or what the capacity that you had that helped you achieve that, so that you're ready to talk about it in very specific and concrete terms, not just I'm good at building relationships, but my strength, my ability to build strong relationships has resulted in, 1, 2, 3. So you can be specific, tie it to outcomes, tie it to things that people who, like everything measured out and quantified, can appreciate. And that's going to be very helpful.
Great advice. And how, there are times where I think, and if I even think back in my own career, where I'll say to myself, gee, Charlene, you were your own worst enemy in this situation. You could have handled this differently. Do women come to you with that often, or do you see that? And, how are ways that we are our own worst enemies?
Well, I think we can be our own worst enemies. I don't. I think men can be their own worst enemies too. I've seen a fair amount of that over the years. But I think that we can be our own worst enemies often in different ways. And that was the whole idea behind How Women Rise, is to look at after all these years of looking at women's strengths, And after all these years of looking at inclusive practices, to ask the question, where are the internal barriers that still hold women back? Things like the perfection trap, the disease
Oh,
to
yes.
please, minimizing, reluctance to claim our achievements, putting our job before our careers. The
Big one.
distinctive things that really are kind of mindsets or presumptions or attitudes that women have that they think they're going to get credit for, but that often hold them back. So that's what I was really trying to get at in How Women Rise. You know, where are those internal barriers? And then most importantly, how do we address them specifically? And how do we address them more generally? And how do we help other women to address them, whether they work for us or with us, colleagues, peers, etc.
Yeah, before I left the corporate environment to start my own practice, I really fell into that perfection trap, and I realized that after 30 years, and I had gone through an illness, but I realized after 30 years, I had spent 3 decades perfecting how to be the perfect Black female executive. Right. And, don't talk too much. Don't be too loud. Be passionate, but don't be too passionate. Right. Know how to be the non-threatening Black woman in the office. And I realized then as I started getting feedback that people were telling me your perfection is a problem. Right. And I thought, wait a minute, how am I supposed to win here if I'm being this is a flaw and now, so I'm going to be perfect. And now that's working against me too. So it was really encouraging to me and gratifying to read that in your book about the perfection trap, because I do think many women get caught up in that. Sally, you are so inspiring. And, today more than ever, I see people, especially women, who really struggle with understanding and knowing their worth or their value. How did you get to the point where you understood your worth?
It was very specific for me. As you can see in the little origin story I told about how I got involved in women's leadership, I came to it very much as a writer, writing about what I saw. Mm-hmm. And because it was a new point of view and because I was doing something other people weren't doing, what I found was within a couple of years, people were seeing me as an authority. People were seeing me as an expert. People were seeing me as a leader. And I spent a number of years pushing back on that, saying, no, I'm just a writer. I'm here just to document things. I'm not a leader. I'm not an authority, etc. And then one day I kind of heard myself and I thought, why am I contradicting people whose experience has been that what I've learned and shared has helped them? Mm-hmm. And that by pushing back with a kind of false modesty or, minimizing what I'd actually done and fought hard to do, that first of all, I wasn't doing myself any favors, but I was in fact pushing back against what other people's perceptions were. So for me, it became a matter of sort of accepting and being willing to acknowledge how people saw me and step into that in a way that I felt comfortable with. So I immediately stopped that habit of minimizing. Oh no, well, there are other, it was just, I happened to be lucky. I was in the right place at the right time, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I just dropped that in favor of thank you. I'm so glad I've helped you. And so I think that was really the turning point for me, because I stopped trying to restrict and over-define what my identity and my contribution was, and I embraced it.
There's magic in that. And so what changed for you once you got to that point and realized, hey, wait a minute, I'm sabotaging myself here. Let me stop. I'm not lucky. I earned it. I wrote it. I did the work. So what changed for you once you began to realize that?
What changed for me was essentially everything, because I became comfortable doing what I was doing. when I was trying to deny it, or part of me was not accepting it, that made me feel like I was an imposter, because
Oh,
people were
okay.
saying something about me and I wasn't resonating with
Mhm.
it. Once I decided that I had to accept that and to listen to what people were saying about me, then I was able to drop the whole imposter thing and just say, yeah, this is who I am. This is what I've done. I'm glad it's been helpful to you. And so when I did programs, when I was being interviewed, I was just much, much more comfortable with the whole thing, because there wasn't that part in my brain going, if they only knew, et cetera.
Of course. Of course, I'm reminded of the great quote by the late Dr. Maya Angelou. It means something different, but when she says, when people, show you who they are, believe them. And maybe it is, when we show people who we are and they tell us, we need to believe them, right?
Beautiful. That's a
Right.
wonderful way of phrasing that and adapting that quote. Agree. When people tell us something, believe them and
Right.
thank them. Don't argue with them.
Right. Have the right internal fortitude to be able to accept it. And you said something that I think is so important. And I've even heard myself say it a few times as I was climbing in my career and being successful. And people would say, oh, congratulations on your success. And I would say, oh, well, I was in the right place at the right time, or I feel so lucky, And now when I talk to women or my two adult daughters, I'm quick to say, no, you were not lucky. You earned it. You worked hard for it. Own it. So it's just so great to hear so many more women talking about that, and to hear you talking about it. Sally, the name of this show is Know Your Worth, Command Your Value. So I have to ask you, what advice would you give someone of any age or stage in their career or life to help them know their worth, but then also take the action to command their value?
I think that if we're having trouble articulating to ourselves what our worth is, the most important thing we can do is ask other people. After a meeting, say, what I said there, was that helpful? Did you find that helpful? Was that a contribution? And then you can usually get people to make some kind of comment. And as you reflect on that, you will begin to realize what your strengths are. And then you can hone those, and then you can articulate them. When you said that at the beginning, that my journey, the purpose of my work, my mission for these 35 years has been to help women to recognize, articulate, and act on their greatest strengths. The articulation point is really important, and we can come to that by asking other people to reflect back to us. So don't be shy about that. That's a way of leveraging other people also as allies and building allyship through those kinds of questions. So that's what I would suggest, is get active about saying to people, did the contribution I made there, was that helpful to you? Did that ring any bells for you? And if so, what? Just so we can begin to start keeping that list of what we are contributing.
Oh, that's great. And how do we know that may sound like a trick question, but it's not. But when we're asking people for that information, how do we know when we can trust what they're telling us, right? Because there are people who want us to succeed, and there are also detractors. I think there are more people who want people to succeed than detractors. But how do we know? Is there a way to know, who we go to ask for that kind of feedback?
Yes, well, I think it's important and you can ask people who you think may be detractors for that, because sometimes you'll get valuable insights from them. But I think we always want to put it in the context of what others are saying. So if 10 people tell us one thing and somebody else tells us something that doesn't relate to what we've heard, I think we want to put that aside. We want to not notice it. Sometimes we tend to focus on the negative comment.
Yes.
Why did they say that? Or, oh, that one person in the audience looks like they're not enjoying it. What am I doing wrong? If other people do, just take your eyes and your ears off them, thank them, and move on.
Oh, that's great advice. Sally, thank you for being our resident expert today. This has been such a treat, both personally and I'm sure for all of our viewers. How can people get in touch with you, learn more about you?
Sure. Well, my website is sallyhelgesen.com. I'm active on LinkedIn. I'm going to be getting up to speed on Twitter in the next 2 months or so. I also have a newsletter on Substack. So you can go to that. And if you would be so kind as to subscribe, because it helps us know who is reading it, who's in touch with us, and really a very positive thing. So I'll be sharing some bits from my forthcoming book called Rising Together going forward on the newsletter.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I can give a nod for Sally's newsletter. If you aren't reading it or you aren't following it, I cannot encourage you enough to go on to Sally's website and to follow her, because she really is just a treasure of information and very helpful. I think you're part therapist, part encourager, chief encouragement officer. And so it's really just fantastic. So thank you for being with us. Viewers, thank you for listening and watching today. And just in case someone hasn't told you this today, you are enough. Thank you.